Well, good evening. We're excited to be here with you, and excited you could come and see all these faces. And hello. And thought you were Joel Osteen, but you're not. So, man, he looks just like him, kind of. So it's good to be with you. I want you to open your Bibles up to Revelation. You probably already know. Children are dismissed, as well. You probably already know the format for the week, but I'm just going to give it to you really quickly in case you forgot. There are two speakers each evening, and those of you who are speakers, this is important for you to hear as well. The first speaker gives a condensed presentation, a condensed message. Of course, we're going to have an altar time. There's going to be some transitional worship. You're free to respond, which we encourage, obviously. But it's really kind of a building to the next speaker who comes and gives a little bit of a longer message. First message about 30 minutes. Next message is going to be a little bit longer. And as a side note, it's just kind of neat to see how consistently God weaves those two things together, and just, it's a phenomenal thing that we get to be a part of. And so that's going to be going each evening. In the mornings, we have 3 teaching sessions starting tomorrow, and they begin at 9 o'clock. You already know. They begin at 9 o'clock. And we've got a variety of speakers and some different topics. We're doing some different topics than we did in the last few years. So you can get on the website and see all that. Last thing, as we mentioned, we have a nursery, and got a sign-up sheet that we want to make available to you. Some of you that have come, if you have children, you can kind of participate in this and swap with other parents. And we're going to make this available to you. We're going to put it out on the table. My wife, who's just walking in, you'll be able to see her, and she can give you some information on the sign-up sheet and all that. Fair enough? Well, let's get in the Word. I want to share with you this evening out of Revelation chapter 2, and we'll look with you specifically, chapter 3, and we'll look with you specifically the church in Philadelphia. And we've been walking through the book of Revelation for the last few years, begin to supplement it with our studies in John, and just the last couple years is pretty much where I've been living. I've just avoided every other study that we've done and just completely immersed myself in this book. And found that it has, and we're going to go into some of this in my teaching sessions in the mornings on Thursday and Friday, but we define that the book of Revelation has 3 main sections to it. The introduction, which is chapter 1, chapters 2 and 3, is the second section, which is an address to 7 churches. They're the recipients of the introduction. And then the third section is from chapter 4 to chapter 22, which is the prophecy, which is the future stuff. Now, one of the big debates in our culture is whether it's future now, okay? And I'll leave that for Dr. Manley to flesh out. What we know for sure is that the future stuff, it was future to them when they received it. That's what prophecy is, okay? Prophecy is future. It's foretelling. And so it was future. And so we've been spending a lot of time in recent months into chapters 2 and 3 looking individually at the churches. One of the major themes that comes through the churches, and it's pinpointed in Philadelphia, is evangelism. But one of the things that's really significant about evangelism, it's not program-oriented. It doesn't even seem to be structured within a purpose, kind of a purpose of a body. In other words, they don't come together and say, our focus is going to be evangelism, and this is how we do it. The churches are evangelistic, but evangelism seems to be the natural outflow of being a Christian. Okay? If you are Christian, you're going to be naturally evangelist. You're going to be salt and light. Okay? You're going to be a proclaimer. You're going to draw people to Jesus Christ. They're going to see Him in you, and you're going to be evangelistic. This seems to be one of the major themes through these 7 churches. But it gets a little bit more pointed in the church of Philadelphia, which the focus in Philadelphia certainly has a major theme of evangelism. But evangelism takes on the garment of stewardship. Okay? That each and every one of us being salt and light, now hear this, each and every one of us being salt and light have a stewardship that God has given us. Okay? We've been given an area of ministry. Every single one of us. We are all ministers in Christ. Shake your heads. This is true. Okay? We all have a stewardship. And Philadelphia, he's stressing this stewardship, and this is how he stresses it. And again, a real quick side note, when you get into the beginning of the address to each church, Jesus introduces himself to the church. Okay? He introduces who's speaking to the church. What's really remarkable about his introductions is that Jesus not one time uses his name. Jesus never uses his name in the introductions. Instead, what he does is he introduces himself in a way that it is linked to the purpose that he has for that individual church. That's a mouthful. Let me say it again. When Jesus introduces himself to the church, he links himself in the introduction with his purpose for that church. Okay, an example, quick one, which would be Smyrna, one of the easiest. Jesus introduces himself as the one who's first and last, who died, came to life again. His purpose for Smyrna is that it would overcome persecution. So in his introduction, he links himself to their purpose. He says, listen, I've been there, I've done that. Okay, I'm the first and the last. I died, came back to life. If you get all wrapped up into me, you see in me the answer that I'm bringing to you. He is the answer for the church. He links himself with the purpose for each church. It's really important. Now, for Philadelphia, he introduces himself, and you see what he really wants to say to the church when he introduces himself as the one who holds the key of David. Now, if you've ever studied through Revelation, one of the things you're going to quickly find is that language is difficult. Okay, a lot of it's strange, okay? Imagery stuff. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to begin to get into some of the language and realize that it's not literal, okay? Jesus doesn't literally have a sword dangling out of his teeth, okay? The sharp double-edged sword. It's not literal, okay? He does not turn into an animal, a lamb, into chapter 5. It's not literal. The church are not fashioned in terms of lampstands. That's not literal. It's all imagery language. Now, here's the problem. You'd say, okay, it's imagery language, but when you get into imagery language, where's the code key? You know, how do you find out what the imagery is? Do you just make it up, or you just kind of guess? It's apocalyptic literature. It gets all of the imagery from the Old Testament. Okay? All the imagery in Revelation comes right out of the Old Testament. It dealt with a lot, and probably mentioned and allude to it this week several times. The church in Thyatira, Jesus has eyes like blazing fire. Okay? There's two types of fire in the Old Testament. There's like fire that'll burn your house down, and then there's fire that is associated with the glory of the Lord. Okay? And so he uses that glory, spiritual fire out of the Old Testament to give content to what he's saying in these passages. Now, when Jesus says, I am the one who holds the key of David, that phrase, and it's really wonderful and fortunate, the holds the key of David is only used one other time in the whole Bible, and it's used out of the Old Testament. I want you to go back with me to the book of Isaiah. I want to show you how this is used, and I want you to look with me at chapter 22, where you find this phrase, holds the key of David. Okay, it's really neat. The context of what's going on in Isaiah, which is a tremendous book, is and this is a little bit confusing. I've really tried to understand this. Really sought Nathan to help me, but he won't return my calls. But it's if you happen to pass, you too, huh? If you pass Ezekiel chapter 38, what you find is that Hezekiah, okay, king Israel during this time, he's sick, and he's been in and out of illness for some time. And so you're under the impression that he's sick in chapter 22, but we don't have any direct references to that, okay? But the king of Israel's sick. And so in his absence, and he's not, you're under the impression, he's not totally withdrawn from leadership, but in his sickness, he delegates certain aspects of the kingdom to other people, okay? Well, in regards to the palace, you learn in chapter 22, which is a really neat chapter, he delegates authority to this guy named Shebna. Who? Shebna. Okay, he's delegated authority to this guy named Shebna. Well, God has all been out of shape about Shebna. Kind of neat. He's really upset about Shebna. You'd say, how upset is he? If you go down into verse 17, he tells Isaiah the prophet, I want you to go to Shebna, and this is what I want you to tell him. Beware. You know what the word beware means? Beware. Okay? It means beware. This is what he says, verse 17. Beware, the Lord, listen to this, the Lord is about to take firm hold of you and hurl you, O you mighty man. He will roll you up tightly like a ball. It's an illustration. He will roll you up tightly like a ball and throw you into large country. There you will die, and there your splendor chariots will remain. You disgrace to your master's house. Okay? Yeah, God is not happy with Shebna. Really been out of shape. Now you'd say, okay, what did he do? Okay, he cheated on his spouse with somebody, right? Okay, he stole from the king. He used, what did he do? What great immoral sin did this guy commit that God would be all bent out of shape? When you study about Shebna, and we don't know a ton, but you can find little bits about him here and there. Shebna, get this was bizarre at first. Shebna is a very moral man who is completely and wholly devoted to God. Completely. Just really focused and really seeking, completely and wholly devoted to God. But there's a problem. His entire purpose, he uses all the capacity, all of his power, all of his influence, and all of his authority for one purpose. Okay? Now again, he is a steward over the palace. He has a really significant position in Israel, and he uses all of his authority and all of his influence for one purpose. Listen to what it says, beginning in verse 15. This is what the Lord says, the Lord Almighty, go say to the steward Shebna, who is in charge of the palace, what are you doing here, and who gave you permission to cut out a grave for yourself here, hewing your grave on the height and chiseling your resting place in the rock? I'm finding several different sets of scholars that have different opinions on this. Okay, some say that literally there was this place, this hallowed place, okay, in the palace somewhere in Israel where certain kings would be buried, which I'm not sure how true that can be because we have kings that are scattered all over the place, okay, like prominent kings. But there was this, some suggest there was this place where the certain kings and these kind of iconic figures in Israel, that they were buried in this hallowed place that kind of secured and guaranteed them a place in the kingdom. That gets far stretched. Another group of scholars say it's imagery and language about certain people in Israel who have guaranteed, have because of their devotion and because of their intimacy with God, because of their obedience, they are secured, they have a secure place in the coming kingdom. They belong to God, okay? However you want to interpret that, what's really going on with Shebna is he is after that point. While he's still alive, his entire focus, now get this, his entire focus is given over to getting himself a place in the kingdom. Okay? That's what he uses his stewardship for. That's what he uses his influence for. That's what he uses his power for. It's like, forget about everybody else. It's about me getting myself into the kingdom. And when God comes and sees this focus in the life of Shebna, and again, you may look at this and say, well, that's, what's bad about getting yourself into the kingdom? What's bad about wanting to be with God? Wanting to be with Jesus, being with him what's bad about that? His entire focus of life was to that end. It was to that end that he was pressing, was that end that he was focused. All of his power and authority was for that gain. Now, when you go down in the passage, of course, God's been out of shape about this, and he says he's going to dispose. Verse 19, he says, I will dispose you from your office, and you'll be ousted from your position. This is all content that is building to the key, holding the key of David, okay? He says, I'm going to dispose you from your office because your focus is not my focus. You're being a shepherd. You're being a steward of the palace. A steward in Israel is not my idea of being a steward. And he says in verse 20, in that day I will summon my servant, Elikim. Okay, this guy is the son of Hilkiah. And he says, I will clothe him with your robe. I will fasten your sash around him, and I will hand your authority over to him. In other words, he's going to take everything that had to do with Shebna's position, power, and influence. He's going to strip Shebna of that. He's going to put it all in this guy named Elikim's hand, who is a servant of God, a true servant of God. Not for selfish gain, not just to get to heaven. He's a true servant of God. And this is what he says. Ending in verse 21, he says, he will be a father to those who live in Jerusalem and to the house of Judah. See, his stewardship, which is the kind of stewardship God is calling us to, okay, kind of stewardship that God is calling this steward of the palace, okay, this major prominent position in the kingdom, that stewardship is not marked by getting myself in. That stewardship is marked by getting everybody else in. See, the focus of Elikim is not going to be preservation of self. The focus of Elikim, and he uses a really strong term, father. Now, you don't have to do too much study on the word father to kind of understand the imagery behind that. I've got kids. And being self-preserved, being focused on self-preservation and being a father are completely opposites. Let me put it in ways we can grasp it. Your house is burning down. Your kids are inside. Okay? You don't really learn it until you fall out the front door with your wife. There's two responses. Kids inside. Okay? Shepherd, self-preservation says, wow, at least we made it out. Wow. Okay? That's Shebna. That's Shebna. It makes me wonder about the church. See, that's Shebna. At least I made it. I'm a father. I'm running back in there. What if you're burned? Does it matter? In fact, there's not even a decision on that. When I was young, I didn't have a very good relationship with my dad. But there was one time I remembered where my dad was a father to me, and I saw, and he loved me. I knew that. Just a very difficult man to show it. But there's one time where it came through. We were, he wasn't the smartest guy in the world, okay? And he would clean the garage floor with gasoline, okay? Because it got up all the grease and stuff. That's what he would do. Pour glass and kerosene on the garage floor. We'd scrub it down. It was all this smooth kind of, it's almost like ceramic, but it was cement, but it was not cement. It was smooth. He cleaned it. Anyway, so he's cleaning all this, the garage floor. And we had an old furnace in the corner right by the front door. And I remember he would start cleaning all this, and I would watch him, and I'd get way back, and I was pinning myself up against the wall, and I'd watch him. I'd always help him in the garage, and I happened to be over by the furnace, and furnace clicked on. And I remember seeing my dad over there, and all I remember was seeing was flames. And I'm sitting there going, dude, this is killer. This is awesome. Okay? I remember sitting there going, wow. I mean, it was just flames. And truly, on our garage door, still today in the garage, there's black flame and burn marks all over the door and all over the side of the wall. And I'm sitting there, and I see my father coming running through the flames, running through the garage, grabbing me up. My mom was trying to open the door, and the pressure from the heat wouldn't open the door. And he grabs me, turns around, and runs out of the garage and steps right there. And I was just, wow, it was awesome. Yeah. He wasn't too great the rest of the time. But that one time, he came and rescued me out of the garage. And it literally, it's profound. I mean, it was profound. I mean, literally running into a wall of fire. Okay? There's no self-preservation in that. Okay? God comes to Shebna, and he is bent out of shape. Listen how strong this is. He comes and says, I'm going to roll you up tighter like a ball and chuck you. I'm going to chuck you into a land where you're going to die. Why? Because you are completely absorbed spiritually. You're completely absorbed spiritually with yourself. So I'm going to replace you. And by the way, Elikim becomes a messianic prophecy figure Jesus is going to be. In other words, the whole call and attitude and tone and spirit that's got a hold of Elikim is going to be epitomized in Jesus. In fact, he says in verse 22, I will place on his shoulder the key to the house of David. Now, in our passage, go back to Revelation. In our passage, it says Jesus will hold the key of David. That, when you think of hold, you probably might think, what I think is this, you hold something, you grab it in your hand and you hold it. Well, the Greek word hold can mean a variety of things. To hold, it may mean possess, it may mean bear. And back in verse 22 of Isaiah chapter 22, it says that Eliakim will bear. In other words, he carries on his shoulders. He embodies in his person this key of David. He bears that authority. He bears that weight. He has that leaning on his life. He walks around with that on his shoulders. Okay? He's going to be a father to the people of Israel. Evangelism. Okay? Not program. It's here's salt and light. It's stewardship. Jesus comes to Philadelphia and he comes to them and he says, I am the one who just emulates this. I carry on my shoulder the weight of it. Jesus was not concerned about getting himself to heaven. So much so that he deliberately goes to hell so you could go to heaven. He perfected this. See, this was his focus. Now, he moves into Philadelphia, and that's kind of an introduction to the really quick part. You come down to verse 12, and he's calling the church to this stewardship, which means he's calling every one of us in this room. I really want you to think about this. I'm torn in these days. I'm torn in these days with people that you just want to grab by the shirt and toss them out and say, don't ever come back. You meet people that just, how do you deal with a person like that? How does practical ministry work in a stationary environment where you're walking with broken people? How does that work? Okay. How do you care for someone? Where's the line between enabling and holding accountable? See, that's difficult. See, where's Jesus' stance on that? Really matters to us in these days. And it's something I've wrestled over. When you come down in this passage, in this stewardship idea, living in the ordinary, average, every day of your life, walking with this stewardship, Jesus says this, verse 12, he who overcomes, in other words, I see Jesus, he holds the key of David, he bears this stewardship, he's calling Philadelphia to have that same kind of posture to their world, and to him who overcomes, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. The word overcome is another way of saying him who embraces this call. The word overcome, you might look at that the way that I have. Jesus says that to every church. There are certain repetitive phrases and words that Jesus uses to every church. He who has an ear to hear, he says that to every church. This is the one who, and then introduces himself. It's repetitive words and phrases. When Jesus says to him who overcomes, it's a specific reference that he makes to every church. And some scholars, and I don't know how in the world they missed this, have said that overcomes is this future event where at the final judgment, if you've lived and embraced the message that Jesus gives you your whole life, when you die and overcome, there's going to be a reward. Well, the Greek word overcome is not in the future tense, it's in the present tense. In fact, it's a present participle, which means, and a present participle, you almost always put ing at the end of it. So the proper translation is, get this, him who is overcoming. Okay? To every one of the church, Jesus says, in other words, those of you who are buying into this, okay, those of you who are accepting this stewardship in your life, that I'm going to be a father in the place where you have placed me to minister. Hear this. I'm going to be a father in the place where there's no easy answers. It stinks, doesn't it? Okay? I'm going to live that. I'm not going to run from that. I'm not going to pack up ship and run down the road. I'm going to be a father to the child that is so difficult. Okay? I'm going to embrace that. Now, what's really powerful about this embracing, let me give you two quick examples of this. Go back with me to the book of Luke, chapter 18. I want to give you a couple examples of a present participle, which is profound. Overcoming this present embracing of this call Listen to how it's articulated. This is how a present participle is used. And take this usage and stick it in our passage. Two quick ones really quick. In chapter 18, verse 12, Jesus is giving a parable and illustrating between tax collectors and Pharisees. And he's given the Pharisee illustration, and he uses a present participle. He says that the tax collector stands up in verse 12 and says, I fast twice a week. That's a present participle. Okay, I fast twice a week. Now, a present participle literally means it's in the present tense, and it always remains in the present tense, but it has periods of time where it isn't seen. And what that means in layman's terms is it's a routine aspect that always happens in your life. This is what the Pharisee is saying. He says, I fast. It's a routine thing that's going to continually happen in my life in the present tense. It's always going on. I fast twice a week. This is what he also says. He says, I fast twice a week, and I give a tenth of all that I get. In other words, it's in the present tense. This is a present aspect of everyday life. In fact, the present participle, present tense, is oftentimes called the lifestyle tense because it's just it's a normal aspect of my everyday life. He says, I give a tenth of all that I get. In other words, anytime any money comes flowing into my life, immediately, present participle, it's an aspect of my life, a tenth of it goes, I give a tenth of it on the tithe. It's a present participle. Now, it's used again in chapter 19 when Zacchaeus, and this forever changed the way that I looked at good old Zacchaeus. Chapter 19, verse 8, Jesus has intersected the life of a man named Zacchaeus. And the man finds salvation, this tax collector, and he stands up and he says in verse 8, Lord, or he says, look, Lord, here and now. Now, I've always, he's a businessman, okay? So I've always understood Zacchaeus standing up saying, look, Lord, here and now. Not, then and there. Not tomorrow, but here and now. In other words, take advantage of it while you can. Blue light special, okay? If you come back tomorrow and say, hey, Zacchaeus, that was then and there, okay? When he stood up, here and now. I always understood that he was given this one-time kind of offer thing, but he's not. It's starting. The idea would be starting here and now, I give. Present part. It's a lifestyle. I give half my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. I will pay back. Present part. In other words, starting right now, the new attitude in my life for finances is going to be this. It's going to become a normal aspect of my lifestyle. Okay? Not future, but it's overcoming in my finances. It's a lifestyle focus. In our passage, when Jesus is speaking to those who are overcoming, in other words, what he's saying is those of you who are grabbing a hold of this stewardship focus and are making it an everyday kind of policy in your life. It is an everyday posture. This is the way that I'm going to live. It's going to be a normal way that I walk. I'm going to walk and live with this posture, with this stewardship wherever I go, in every area of my life. In other words, if I'm going to be at a McDonald's drive-thru, I'm going to have this stewardship. If I'm going to be in my home life, I'm going to have this stewardship. One more aspect before I explain a couple things. He finishes this and says, those who overcome, I will make a pillar. Not physical pillar. It's the same word that's used back in Galatians. Back in Galatians when Peter says about Paul, chapter 2, where Paul says that Peter, James, and John were pillars. It means they were those with great influence. What Jesus is saying, and I want you to receive this, what Jesus is saying about evangelism. And when I'm talking about evangelism, I've got 2 kids. I want my 2 kids to grow up and know and walk with Jesus. Okay? Not be religious, not go to church. I want my 2 kids to grow up and know and walk with Jesus. I accept that call. They are in my stewardship. They are in my ministry. Now, that doesn't mean that I have a plan of attack, that I have an evangelistic strategy to win them. What it means is this is going to be a lifestyle focus for me. That whether we're riding four-wheelers together, whether we're out to eat, whether we're doing homeschool, okay? In every setting of my life, I'm going to walk and live with this focus. I take on the responsibility, the key of David, I take on the responsibility for my kids and their relationship with Jesus Christ. In any given setting, I'm not concerned with just raising them and getting them out of the house. I'm not just concerned, and that's just my family. I'm talking about extended family, which are people that I don't like that much. Okay? I'm talking about people that I meet at the Starbucks drive-in. I'm talking about people that live in my community. My next door neighbor, who always has two things on him at all times: Bud Light and a pistol. I've got to know him the last 2 weeks. What if I took responsibility for him? What if I got involved in his life and said, Jesus, I accept that stewardship. I accept the responsibility of him making it in the kingdom. That's going to be my focus. In fact, I want you to make me a pillar. In other words, I want you to give me great influence in his life. That when I speak, it matters. That you're going to open up opportunities where you're going to reveal yourself, and God's going to use me in a profound way in his life. I take on that responsibility. I want you to make me a pillar in his life. Jesus, we love you this evening. Lord, as I'm walking through Philadelphia, it's easy for me to see and get excited about the truth that's so plain to see there. What is not so encouraging is how difficult that process comes. How difficult that process is. The pain that's involved. The hurt that has to be dealt with. Taking it on the chin for others. Father, I pray that you would not let us shrug off. And I wonder about Shebna. I wonder, he wasn't an evil man. I can't find where he's an evil man. He's not living in sin. But I wonder, Father, if he was put in such a situation where it was so difficult that he just said, hey, forget him. I'm after Jesus. I'm going to heaven. I'm carving out a place for myself in the hallowed. Don't let me cop out. Don't let me shrug off. You've put me in an area. You've put me in a high school. You've put me in a math class. You've put me on a basketball team. You've put me in a job. You've put me in a routine of life. You've put me in a situation that's not necessarily comfort. It's not necessarily comfortable. But I accept the responsibility and the stewardship where you want to make me one who is a pillar, great influence in the lives of others. And I embrace that as a lifestyle. I pray, Father, as we worship you in the coming moments, that you would open our